We are with an organization called Launch Global. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all. And we're here talking about the critical season between college and launching. And what we mean by launching, obviously, we mean getting to the field, going overseas, being missionaries or goers among the unreached specifically. So before we get started, what I want you to do is turn to your neighbor, and we're just going to chat for a few minutes. Turn to someone next to you and answer this question. Why did you come to this breakout specifically? You have 1 minute. Go.
Sean's really cool.
Yeah, so I really like Sean. Adam and Summer are also really cool.
I really just want to be like him. So,
Yeah.
and I heard this thing called Launch Global is really good.
So I was hoping they want to win that kingdom again sometime.
Yeah, that's really good. And I miss all my friends, and you guys remind me of them. So they're all gone now.
We'll be your friends, Jaylen.
What?
We'll be your friends.
All my
We're not moving to
close
Indonesia.
fancy girlfriends. That's what I mean. You guys can be my close friends.
30 seconds. Ten. I know my kids are like, don't count, Dad. Stop counting. Okay, next question for you and your neighbor. Would you rather live in the heat of Saudi Arabia or the cold of Nepal? Go. Oh, okay. Will you pass these out? You can throw them to people when they answer questions correctly. All right, next question. Well, first, raise your hand if you'd rather live in the heat of Saudi Arabia. What about the cold of Nepal? Just so you know, we're taking notes. Would you rather, next question, would you rather live in a place with no running water or no electricity? Go. Neither is not an option, Morgan. The fire extinguishers, I think. All right. Yeah. It's clean water. Next question. Next question. I apologize if this one's too spicy. Would you rather eat rats in China or slugs in Sudan? Wow, the amount of people are like slugs. Easy. Who's my rat people? We got a couple.
Wait, are the rats cooked?
Of course.
Okay, yeah, barbecue rat. Show. This slug you. What is this slime for me?
Yeah. But if you cook it, it dries it up a little bit. I think so. Good protein. All right. All right, this is fun. The next set of questions comes with a prize if you get it right or you get close to it right. But you're not allowed to use your phone. Okay, and let's raise your hand. All right, ready? Which country has the highest population of Muslims? Yes. Correct. You get a $5 arcade token. Come on, Adam. That was terrible. You don't need to flip it. Which country has the second highest population of Muslims? Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. Yeah. No. You don't get one. Yes. No. 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 Yeah, Pakistan. India's a close third, though. Let's be real. And in a decade, India will probably surpass them all. Okay. What country has the most spoken languages in it? Yes. Close. No. No. Indonesia, you're in the general geography. Yes. No. Yes. Papua New Guinea. Now, of course, this depends on how you define language, but they say, Papua New Guinea has around 840 different spoken languages in it, which is nuts. How many languages, according to Wycliffe, how many languages have the full Bible translation in the world?
How many languages are you gonna ask that question? What?
I didn't ask that one, but I can ask that one next, depending on the website that you go to. But how many, according to Wycliffe at least, how many languages have a full Bible translation? Who wants to hazard a guess? Yes. No. Higher. Yes. Higher. Give Wycliffe some credit, y'all. They're doing good work. Yes. Less, but you're closer than 30. He said 1,000. Yes. More. Less. 730. Yeah, about that. 730. Give it to her. Jalen. Oh, Britt did? I didn't hear it. I'm so sorry. Yes.
Just to put that in context, how many languages are there in the world?
Next question. How many languages are there in the world? More than 700, correct. What? More. More than 1,500. More than 2,500. More than 3,001. Great guess. Very specific. More than 3,800. Twice as. More. More. More than 5,900. Yes. Less than 10,000. Who is it? 7,000. About. 7,139 languages in the world. That's right. All right. If you're this only, I think we have to. This last one has to be for college students. Stand up if you've been to more than 5 countries. Some of y'all grew up overseas and you're like, this is nothing. All right, remain standing if you've been to more than 10 countries. Brian, you are not a college student. We got one? How many countries? 22! To balance it out, stand up if you've never flown on a plane before. Okay, everyone been on a plane? Stand up if you've never left California. Everybody's left California. I'm trying to who's traveled the least here? Everyone's well traveled. Anyone never left the West Coast? Anyone never left the country?
We got some more.
3, 4. Mexico doesn't count. So stand up if you've never left the country. 1, 2, 3. Boom. 3 of them. You guys get money. However, I hope after this conference you will be encouraged to go visit another country and culture. All right, this has been fun, y'all. We're Launch Global. This is why we exist. Launch Global exists to mobilize churches to develop laborers and leaders who multiply churches among unreached people groups. What does that mean? What does that look like? So I know a team that's in a large city in the Middle East right now, and two of those teammates went prayer walking one day. And as they were prayer walking, just kind of walking around a neighborhood and praying over the neighborhood, they came across a man who was on crutches. And they went up to the man, we're going to call him Mohammed. They go up to Mohammed and ask him, what the story is. And he was in a car accident, and his ankle was just crushed and needed surgery, the whole 9 yards. And they asked if they could pray for him. And so they pray for him. He said yes. And they pray for healing over his ankle in Jesus' name. I offered to share the gospel with him. He's not interested, and he goes into his home. They ask if they can, first they ask if they can return, and can we follow up with you in a few days? He's like, sure. Later that night, Muhammad starts noticing that his ankle hurts less and less. And he realizes he doesn't need to take the painkillers that he usually takes to go to bed. So he falls asleep, and he wakes up, he sleeps really well, wakes up the next morning, and notices that he can now put weight on his foot, on his ankle, that he can actually start walking on it, and he doesn't need the crutches anymore. He has a follow-up appointment with the doctor later that day, and he goes to the hospital. The electricity's out, because it happens in this part of the country. And so he has to take the stairs, can't take the elevator. He walks up the flights of stairs, sees the doctor, and the doctor looks at him and is just amazed. He's like, how did you get here? Like, how are you here? How are you walking? And Muhammad says, well, it's the craziest thing. These two men, they prayed in the name of Jesus over me for my ankle. And I think, like, I'm healed. And the doctor, who was part of the Shia militia, said, you need to leave this hospital right now and don't come back. So he takes his x-rays and he goes to another doctor. And they visit that doctor, shows the x-rays to the doctor, and that doctor says, wait, what are you doing here? There's no way these x-rays are of your ankle. Muhammad had been healed. So the missionaries follow up with Muhammad, as they said they would, a couple days later. And he shares with them this story. They share the gospel with him. He, right then and there, places his faith in Jesus. And they begin this discipleship relationship with Muhammad. They baptize him. And what he does is he posts a picture of his baptism on one of his social media profiles. And this man's like around 60s. And Muhammad says that this was like punching a beehive. It caused a bunch of chaos. His brother, who is also connected to the Shia militia, his son is a Shia militant. They kick him, Muhammad and his wife, out of his house. He has to flee the city. He goes then to the village that he grew up in with his wife. They spend a few months there, several months there, and he's just sharing his testimony like crazy. Over 30 people start following Jesus among this village. And they form sort of these 3 different house churches because they can't gather all together in this village without it being dangerous. Then Muhammad gets arrested. He gets thrown in jail. Once he comes out of jail, the missionary team is still with him, still discipling, still coaching, still training. And then they're walking through the book of Acts with him. They're walking through Paul's journeys with him, and he's saying, that's my story. Like, this is what's happening to me. And then he starts getting the vision for other villages that have never heard the gospel before. And he wants to take people and go to these other villages and start sharing the gospel. And suddenly we see the gospel continue to spread in this part of the Middle East. And disciples are multiplying and new churches are forming. And we have to ask this question of, how do you get from right here, sitting in this chair, to a place overseas where you're seeing fruitful ministry? And if you're on this missionary team, you gotta wonder, well, how do I make a disciple in this culture and with this language? And not only how do I make a disciple, but how do I then train and disciple them to spread the gospel and make other disciples amongst their network? And how do I teach church formation amongst new disciples that have come? How do I train them to do church and be church when I can't even be there because it would be dangerous for a Westerner to go into this village? How do I help them develop leaders from within these churches? How do I teach them a theology of suffering and an expectation of persecution from the word? Because that's very much going to be their reality, more so than it would be for me. How do I teach them and give them a vision for reaching not just their village, but multiple villages, cities, people groups? If you want to go overseas long term, I think what we want to help you in this breakout session, what I want you to walk away with is you need training. And I hope and I pray that as Claude is speaking, as you go to different breakout sessions and you're being stirred, there's something in you that's like, I want to be a part of this. And maybe you're already there. Maybe we're just preaching to the choir, or this is just adding fuel to the fire. The good news is we're not going to give you plane tickets at the end of this breakout, because that wouldn't probably do you any good. It wouldn't do the team that you go to any good. Like, we want you to be developed and trained so that you can sustain on the field long term. And so that's why Launch Global exists. So we mobilize the way that we do for two primary reasons. The first is because of the need. The need is great, and many of you guys already know this, but just the reality of the unreached, the reality of 3+ billion people who have little to no access to the gospel shouldn't sit right with us. Like, we should want to play a role in that, whether we're going to go or not. But not only that, not only are there 3 billion people with little to no access to the gospel who are never going to hear the gospel from someone's lips to their ears through their entire life, but only 3 to 10% of the missionaries in the world are going to these places. Only 3 to 10% are going to the 1040 window we talked about, or maybe you heard about a little bit earlier, this kind of section of the world where the majority of the unreached people groups live. About 1 in 30 goers are going to these places. And so when we're talking about mobilizing, like, we want to focus where the need is the greatest, because there's a significant imbalance, which you're going to hear more about tonight. For every one unreached people group, there are 900 churches and 54,000 Christians. Meaning the resources are there. Like, we have the laborers, right? We have the finances. We have the resources to accomplish the Great Commission, to finish the task, as it were, where we can reach the peoples of the world, but we need to mobilize them. And so we're praying. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. We are praying earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. But the other reason why we do what we do isn't just because the need is great. Isn't just because 3.16 billion people are unreached, but because right now 53% of long-term goers never make it to a second term. Meaning about half of the missionaries are going to go to the field for about 2 to 3 years. They're going to come home and they're going to stay home, and they're not going to return to the field for preventable reasons. Now, do people come off the field for very valid reasons? Absolutely. But there's also a lot of goers who are coming home for things that are preventable, for things that maybe could have been worked on or developed or trained in them before they got there, so that they were able to push through and sustain. I mean, the big ones here are team conflict, right? Or a struggling faith. Like, once you get overseas, it's if you've been, like, it can be really intense. The stress levels are heightened. There's unrealistic expectations. Like, I thought I was going to see this. I thought I was going to be able to do this. I thought it wasn't going to be like this. Or they didn't connect with the host culture. I love, there's a family that I trained with who's in the Middle East right now, and the mom was sharing a story in her first several months of being there, and they're learning Arabic, and they're diving in deep as best they can, and she remembers, like, finding herself just in the grocery store. Just in a simple, small grocery store, and she just completely breaks down crying in the middle of one of the aisles because she can't figure something out. Like, she's just trying to get simple groceries, and because of the language and the context, she can't discern between one thing or the next, and she just crumbles. And I think most goers, they're going to have that moment where you get to the field and you're like, this is too hard. Like, this is just too, and how do we prepare people to be able to push through that, to be able to sustain when those inevitable hardships and moments hit? There's a recent study from one sending organization of 900 overseas workers. They found the number one factor in building resiliency was equipping. The need for in-depth, life-on-life pre-field training to help people work through their issues and grow as disciples before discipling others. And they of the people who had been there 9+ years, 10+ years, they said these are the three major factors that kept them on the field. One was spiritual vitality, that they had a deep, abiding relationship with the Lord. They loved Jesus. They loved his word. They loved prayer. They were able to sustain in the hard seasons because they knew, they had a conviction about their calling and why, God had called them to where they were. And they were willing to sustain through those hard times. There was relational maturity. They understood who they were. They knew their weaknesses, their faults, some of their blind spots. They had relational maturity to work out conflict with their teammates or other leaders. And there was ministry effectiveness. There was a willingness to do what it took. There was a willingness to pivot if you needed to pivot or move if you needed to move. And they were led by the Holy Spirit throughout this whole process. So this is where we come in. How do we help? How do we do this? I'm going to let Adam jump in and kind of explain a little bit more about our process in helping develop goers to get to the field.
Yeah. So we, maybe first of all, how many of you guys are where's everybody at? How many seniors are there? Can you raise your hands? I just want to see seniors, juniors, where you at? Sophomores, freshmen. Let's go. Lone freshman, I think maybe. Maybe there's another one. Cool. 2. Let's go, freshmen. Welcome. So I don't know about you guys, but when you guys started at CBU, did you know what you wanted to do? For the most part? As you took classes, did that affirm or did that persuade you to change your major to something else? Yes, hopefully. I hope so. I hope you're not I hate this, but I'm still doing it, But I think for us, so as you look at this on the screen, you can see that there's these 3 things: discover, develop, deploy. Really, our desire for this idea of discover is we want to do what you guys have done for the last 4 years, but in a shorter time. We want to help you guys discover, what is this where the Lord is leading me? And is this something that the Lord is, moving me towards? And so some of the ways that we do that, and I guess I'm jumping ahead of myself, but some of the ways that we want to do that is we want to help you guys grow in discipleship, a lot of what you guys are doing at CBU, and we want to help you guys figure out how to do that outside of CBU when you guys graduate, because it is different. It will feel different. I was at CBU. I got to learn so much from Brian and from others. And I remember when I graduated, I was like, okay, now what? And it's nothing changed. The things that I would do didn't change, but the environment did, and I needed help. And so we want to help you guys transition from what you guys are doing at CBU into your workspaces, into your neighborhoods, into places like that to continue to help you guys test if this is where the Lord is leading you to do this among unreached people groups. So our role is to, we kind of see ourselves as a bridge between the local church and the unreached. And so we want to help the local church do what it does well, which is equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. And so we want to be a resource, an advocate, a training to help you guys prepare to go. And then, so what that kind of looks like is, like I was saying, discover. We want to give you guys opportunities just to get your feet wet, to grow in a heart for the lost, a heart for the world. And so some of the ways that we do that is we go through these, we have this 10-week disciple-making intensive, and it's really every week we go out sharing the gospel together, where we want to put you in situations where you're learning, how do I share the gospel with someone at the grocery store for the first time? Because I've never done that, and that feels weird. How do I share the gospel with my family members that I'm fearful of doing that with? How can we do that with others? And so we want to go with you guys to help you guys learn how to do that. And then really the bread and butter of what we do is this develop piece, and it's a 9-month residency. And so a lot of the reasons that Sean mentioned people come back from the field, and a lot of the reasons why people endure on the field, we want to walk with you for 9 months to help you kind of discover what are those things in my life that I need to continue to surrender to the Lord before I get to the field, and what are some things that I need to continue to grow in, whether it's sharing the gospel, abiding in Christ, just working with another team, being on mission together with others, and I'll even share some of that in my own story story later of just how important that was for me to like be with other believers on the same mission, on the same focus and task. And then really our job kind of ends when you guys get on a plane. And so that's why we love working with the local church, because we don't want your care to end. And so if we're training you through the local church, your care will continue because your local church will continue to care for you. And so we will help you in that 9 months training, like begin to process, man, where do I want to go? Like what teams do I want to be a part of? We have just a good network of healthy teams around the world with a lot of different missions organizations. And so we want to help partner you with those teams. And so over that 9 month training, we'll start to, hey, let's talk to this team, or like, what are you passionate about? Let's talk to them and figure out, like, do they have any availability for someone to join their team? Do you have the giftings that they need? And so we want to help you guys. We want the church to be a part of your decision-making process when it comes to going to the field. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just on the last slide, since there are some underclassmen in the room too, like I think the goal, a lot of what Launch Global is bringing to the table is post-grad. And so if you're sitting there like, okay, what do I do for 3 years? That is why we're partnering with people like CBU and like this SL office of, they have so many like-minded programs that you guys are going to be training in that, like Adam said, the methodology maybe didn't change when he got out of college. It was just the environment. And so us creating that bridge from you guys here at CBU to then your local church in the area is really like our bread and butter. We want that to be as seamless as possible. We know there's going to be a lot of transitions. Some of you guys might not even stay in the Inland Empire, and that's okay too. We have, I think, about 25 church partners all over the U.S. So if you guys land in another city, most likely we'll know somebody that is still doing this very similar thing of discover, develop, deploy, and these 9 month residencies. And then we really do rely on the sending org. Like Adam said, after our job technically ends as mobilizers, all three of us, that's where the partnership between the local church and your sending agency is going to take you for the long haul. And so, we rely on kind of the end of that bridge for people to be cared for as long as God would have them endure on the field. So I would just stay invested with the Spiritual Life Office, like learn from them. I think as you guys saw, some of the reasons why people aren't enduring on the field are a lot of character reasons and a lot of emotional, relational maturity that I think can, and like from the small subset of, we've only lived here 6 months, so like the small subset of people we've talked to has really come out of graduation and staying through that discipleship process with CBU. So we're excited to, see more of you guys taking that bridge to post-grad life and hopefully to the field.
Yeah. The 9 month groups, the residencies that we do. So right now, our team is embedded in a local church. Right now, we're currently working with a church called The Grove in Riverside. And we value the local church. Like what we do as a team and what our teams do around the country is really connected to and a part of and within the local church, because we believe it's the local church that ultimately should be doing the training and the sending and the caring. And so we want to do it as the local church. Right now we're embedded at a church called The Grove. And if you go there, we'd love to meet you. If you don't go there and you go to another great church in Riverside, because I'm learning there's a lot of really awesome churches in Riverside, then we can still have a conversation with you. And what we found across other partnerships around the country is that we work with other churches. And if a church has a pipeline and a system and a process that they already do to send people to the nations, we just celebrate that. We high five. Let's go. We're like kingdom-minded. But if your church doesn't, they don't have the resources or the capacity, and they're like, hey, would you be willing to train us? And then your local church will do the sending, but we'll do the training. We're happy to do that. As long as there's unity and relationship and partnership between us and your church, or between the Grove and your church. Or we can raise up and train mobilizers and a new team to be within your church. Either way, we just want to be about helping mobilize, not just Riverside, but the Inland Empire in Southern California, because we believe that the need is great enough and Jesus is worthy enough, right, to get more and more glory. And we can lay down the hats that we wear for different names and titles and just work together for the kingdom. Amen? So when we do these 9-month programs, we're inviting people to move into a specific neighborhood or apartment complex together for that year. And during that year, we're just going to be all up in your mess. We are going to be praying multiple mornings a week together. We're going to be functioning like a missional team, going out, sharing the gospel, trying to make disciples in that apartment complex and in that neighborhood. We're going to dive deep into some sin stuff and struggles and issues and temptations. We're going to dive deep into abiding in spiritual disciplines and a theology of suffering and team conflict and how to pursue peace and spiritual warfare and all this stuff, like everything that we can, so that if there's something that is going to take you out overseas, let's deal with it here and now. And let's actually help you discern if maybe you should go overseas, because there are plenty of times where someone enters into the 9-month group and they are, boom, I am headed to Turkey no matter what. And halfway through, we realize, hey, did you know this about yourself? Did you know this about your marriage? Did you know this about like how you react in these situations? I think we might need to take a step back first. Like, let's pause this. Doesn't mean you won't go, but it might take a little bit longer for you, and that's okay. And what we found as coming out of these 9-month groups, if like 10 were to be a part of it, generally speaking, 5 will end up on the field within the next 1 to 2 years. 2 will stay and join our team and help us mobilize, and maybe that's just for a season before they go. And then 3 will stay. 3 are just, they don't feel called to go in that time or in that season. They're just, I just want to be a disciple maker at my job or in my church. And we celebrate that because whatever the decision is, it's obedience to Jesus. You're not going because you think it's better. You're not staying because you're afraid to go. You're going, you're mobilizing, or you're staying because that's what you feel Jesus has called you to, and your obedience is to him and to him alone. All right? The reason why we train. Anything you guys would add? Sorry, I just moved on. Okay. The reason why we train the way we do and why we really emphasize development is because research indicates that it takes approximately 2 years to get overseas, 3 years to commit to saying, 4 years to establish an effective multiplying ministry. So our job is to help combat the disruptions that might arise and take you out of the game. We want you guys to sustain and thrive on the field because it's going to take time it generally will take time for fruitful ministry to occur. So here's where I want to lovingly challenge and encourage you, especially if you are students in the room. Many of you right now, even if you're a freshman, I don't know, you're thinking, it's hard not to think long term. And especially if you're a senior, you're like, what am I going to do next? And maybe you already have that internship or that job lined up. I have the career I want to do, the field that I want to pursue, the grad school I want to go to. Or maybe you're thinking through, I want to do a 1 to 2 year stint overseas. I want to do journeyman. I want to do this with this organization or whatever it might be. And all of those things can be honoring and glorifying to the Lord, and he will use you in those places. But I want to challenge you and encourage you to consider long-term missions as a viable career option. Even now, pray and fast and ask the Lord if he's calling you to go long-term, to give the next season of your life, the next portion of your life to the unreached. Knowing that it might take 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years to find the Muhammad, or to see the fruit that you've praying and begging God to see. Sound good? Is that all right? Okay. We're going to move on to... All right, I'm going back. Boop. Oh, yeah. We found, we said that half goers come back and they don't return for the second term. We found in the hundreds that Launch Global has mobilized over the past decade, 73% have continued into their second term. And so, yeah, it feels weird to pat ourselves on the back. But that's just the reality of what we've seen. And I think it's just the fruit of God's faithfulness to what we're trying to hone in on and focus in on, that we want sustainability. We want people to be healthy. We want healthy disciple makers on the field who are going to sustain and thrive. Would y'all add anything? before we start sharing some stories?
No, I think it's great. So I went to CBU. I'll just jump in, share my story a little bit of how I got doing this role, why I love this role, and why I think it's so crucial, and why I'm so excited to be here in Riverside, at the Grove, in this room with you guys. So I went to CBU, never thought I would go overseas ever. Germaphobe, picky eater, was like, no, not for me. And then I'm in a room with Brian one day, and he's crying about Turkey. And I was like, I don't get it, Brian, why are you crying? And I just had no clue, had no concept about just the lostness.
Not the food, but the country.
Not the food, yeah, not the food, the country. Yeah, he was crying over his turkey sandwich. It was eaten, someone else ate it. But no, and I was just like, I don't get it, Brian. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And then my senior year, someone was like, hey, Adam, do you want to go to China with me after you graduate? And I was like, sure, why not? So I went, I ate all the things, got sick, did all the stuff. It was great. But after that experience was just really felt like through a lot of time just praying and asking the Lord, okay, I'm graduated, like, what do I do? And just felt like he kept saying, like, keep going. I was like, awesome, okay, don't know what that means, but let's keep going. So the only thing I knew was journeyman with the International Mission Board, so started applying, ended up getting to go to North India. And during that pre-process, I feel like my church was so awesome. Like, they were so excited about us going. They did this big event for the three of us that were all going at the same time. And I really feel like they sent me well, but they didn't prepare me well, if that makes sense. So they were on board with me going, but there were so many things that if we were to look at those lists from earlier, I'd be like, man, I actually needed that. Like, I needed somebody in my life at the church that I grew up at saying, hey, Adam, how's your walk with the Lord right now? Like, how's your abiding in Christ? Hey, Adam, what does it look like for you sharing the gospel? Like, how's that going right now? Like, can I help you in any way? How's sin? How are those deep parts of your heart? Have you surrendered those to the Lord right now? Like, anything that we need to bring up, because you're about to go to a place where the enemy has ruled and reigned for thousands of years, and you're just going to stroll in there and think everything's going to be easy? No. Like, he's going to pull on those areas of your life that you've been trying to hide, and they're going to explode. And so that was what my 2 years was like in India. It was really hard. It was a really, really hard experience. There's a lot of beautiful parts of it, but it was really hard. And so when I came back, was like, Lord, I think you want me to keep going. There's nothing on the table of my life except for the unreached knowing and worshiping Jesus, but I need help. I need help with fighting sin. I need help with sharing the gospel, and I need help with living life with other believers. So how do I do that? So I started to ask around and eventually got to a place where I heard about a church in Austin that was doing that. And I was like, yes, I love the local church that they're doing. Let's do it. Let's be a part of it. And so I moved to Austin, and that's where I learned about this training and about Launch Global and all of these things. And from that point on, I was like, man, like, the Lord has given me a passion and desire to see people around the world know and worship Jesus. And similar to what Lee was saying earlier, like, it doesn't matter where I'm at, I know that that's going to be my aim and my focus is unreached people groups knowing and worshiping Jesus. And I think because of my time with Brian, because of my time here at CBU, because of my time in India, like, the Lord has given me a passion to see more of you guys well-equipped, trained, and prepared to go. So that's kind of my story, and hopefully it like fits a little bit of your own lives too, because I went to CBU and Lance Up, all that stuff. I don't even think Lance Up was a thing when I was there. It wasn't. And so I came back from India and I was like, what's Lance Up? I had no idea. But that's my story. And that's why I do this job, because I care about y'all and I care about the unreached and I want them to know Jesus. And more importantly, like, I want you guys to thrive and endure on the field. And so I want to ask you hard questions. Like, I want to ask you, like, how's your relationship with your boyfriend and girlfriend? Guys, you honoring your girlfriends? Like, things like that. I want to ask because I care. And because I think, the nations are worthy of more worship, and that's a part of your journey getting there. So that's a little bit of my story.
I'll go. Yeah. Also, girlfriends, honor your boyfriends as well. My name is Summer. I did not go to CBU and did not grow up in California. I grew up in Texas. And then I went to Wheaton College outside of Chicago, so totally different climate. I visited on a 70-degree day, so I clearly didn't know what Chicago was like. So I think my college years, I studied anthropology, so I liked travel and learning languages and just studying about people that looked and did things different than me, but I didn't have missions, I guess, now that I know all that I know and have experienced more. Like, going overseas was more just exposure for me and like fun and travel. And I think now that I'm a little older, like I realize that's a God-given thing. Like not everybody sitting to the right and left of you in any room like wants to do that, like wants to go to Indonesia or China or Turkey. And so I think sometimes when I was younger, I used to write that off as just like, oh, that's just like a fleshly desire. But I'm like, no, like the Lord created me like that. And even though I didn't have all the Bible behind it and know about all the stats that we were talking about at the beginning of the session, that's like the journey that the Lord took me on and slowly added, kind of pieces to that puzzle. So I would say like for me, when I was at Wheaton, I just got a lot of exposure doing a lot of things like around the world, and any trip or study abroad or like anything they offered, I tried to like spend my summers that way or a semester. And so I know CBU has so many things, and I don't know all the acronyms, but the ISPs and the other things that you guys have access to, like do those. Like, I mean, I was just talking to Adam, like our college offered like a 7-week trip in the summer to the Holy Lands with an OT, NT professor, Christian thought professor. I'm like, when will I ever get to do that in my adult life again? Like, dang it, I should have done that. But just like take opportunities like that you guys have in front of you. And yeah, getting exposure to the world, and especially if you have the opportunity to go visit a long-term team to see like, what is your life like actually live it with them for a little bit. I would say that was super helpful for me when I was kind of in y'all's seat. And then after school, my dream at 21 was to work in a boutique hotel overseas. I like love traveling and love hospitality, and had done food and beverage through college and like really wanted to do that. Again, I was thinking more like, oh, it's such like of the world. Like the Lord can't like use this or redeem this. I just had such a small view of how he works, and kind of Lee's story too is just another example that he can do anything he wants with anything or any desire, that passion that he's given you. And so I did that for a little bit. The Lord kind of took me in and out of that world for a little bit. But I feel like he wasn't opening a door for me to go overseas. And ironically, I was at a really great church in Austin that was sending so many people to the nations. But again, I had this such narrow view of what I wanted to do overseas, and it didn't have anything to do with what I thought missions or missionaries looked like. And so I was like, that's for those people. I'm going to go my own way. So I did the classic Google.com deployment. Anybody ever heard that before? It's where you go on Google and you say, missions, help me, send me. And I basically put in the search box, I remember, I was like 23, and I said, I think hospitality plus Thailand plus Christianity, and just like what came up. And so I literally applied with this random nonprofit in the UK, and I was in Thailand 6 months later. I had no training, I had no team, I had no biblical basis for why I was going. I met with a mobilizer at my church one time, and I remember she was pleading with me, which we're really good friends with her now, but I was pleading with me, like, please don't do this, like, please don't go. And I was like, yeah. Also, how do you raise support? I have to raise like $2,000 for the summer or something. For the year. And so, yeah, I was there for a year by myself, and the Lord was kind even through me kind of getting there, not a way that, especially my job now, I would recommend, but he had me working at a guest house for long-term missionaries. So people that had gone through their church, had a biblical basis, and were doing all these things, seeing multiplying movements in the unreached. I was working at a guest house in Thailand, so I was getting to do meals with them twice a day. People would come if they were in crisis. People would come just for like Chinese New Year. We had so many missionary people come. And so from all over the world, I was hearing these stories. And the thing that stood out to me was just the worthiness of Christ, and the way that they would talk about Jesus was not how I viewed Jesus. And even though I had grew up in the faith and gone to Wheaton and lived in this Christian bubble, I was like, man, like, I don't think the Lord is like the Lord of my life, like you guys are talking about. And so through my story, I came back from Thailand, came back to my church in Austin, met with somebody that did my job, and basically kind of surrendered my life to Jesus through that process. The next year and a half was me doing one of these 10-week disciple-making intensives. I had never shared the gospel or read the Bible with someone from the unreached before that had never heard about it. I got to read with a Chinese postdoc student that had just had a baby and was at the University of Austin. And she had never read the Bible before. She had heard the story of Noah as some folk tale in China, but everything else was new to her. And I just was like, are there people like this everywhere? Like, how have I never done this? And I'm 25. And so I like kind of dove into that world, took the perspectives course, and then started training with Launch Global, and was just, like, I want to do this right. I want to go through my church. I want to go where they think it would be best for me to go. Where's the need? And like, really kind of like Adam said was, dug through my life. My mobilizer was in all of my stuff, and I'm so thankful for that, because it was in a way that no one had ever just looked me in the face and asked me some of those hard things. And so, really thankful for the church and like this journey that the Lord kind of has you on. And I think that's a lot of the stories that of girls that I've gotten to train in the last 8 years, like, all have some type of the loop-de-loop, where it's never that straight path. Like, even I had a girl my first year, we were training in Austin, and she had probably the quickest path to the field, like, was pretty healthy, had a great, view of herself, was really mature, was a senior at UT, graduated, and loved the first team. She visited, visa went great, was on the field 8 months later. It was the quickest timeline I've ever had in a training. And but then I also had, we trained with a couple. Oh, you want to share? Okay, I'll just share the other one. And then my friend Michelle, she kind of also had maybe more of a seamless timeline to the field, but she's been on 3 teams in 6 years. And I think I had heard, maybe somebody here from the IMB would know better than me, but I think the average time a person moves in their first term is like 2 to 3 times, just physically, like your apartment or location or neighborhood in your city, if things like COVID aren't happening, and then you totally get to move somewhere totally different. And so I think regardless of what I think we've been talking about, that obedience factor, that resolve, that hey Lord, like, this is the only thing I'm putting on the table. Like, I don't know if it's going to look like that in 1 to 5 years, but like, I want to be obedient to you, even if it doesn't look like what I think it's going to look like. But that heart posture is still there. That like surrendered posture is still there. And he knows the outcome. He knows if you're going to be on the field in 3 years, 5 years, 6 months. And he knows who your teammates are going to be. He knows those people, those Muhammads that he has for you to meet. And he knows the day that you're going to come home. He knows the day of our last breath. Like, he knows everything, and we can trust him. And so I think regardless of what this timeline looks like, it can kind of feel overwhelming, I'm assuming. But he's a kind father, and he doesn't want to overwhelm us. So those are a few of mine.
Yeah, one more quick story. I know we want to do questions. So we had a couple that was doing this group with us. They had been trying to get to the field for 4 years. It had been a process for them. Their missions organization was saying, like, hey, here's some things that we think are still unhealthy in y'all's marriage specifically. And so we kind of got connected with them through this organization, this missions org. And so we were like so excited, like whatever we could do to help them prepare and get to the field we want to do. And so we got to spend 9 months with them, as Sean was saying, like digging at their lives, but also just seeing them interact with each other a lot of times at 5:30 in the morning when we're praying. You don't always get to see someone's best at 5:30 in the morning. And so we just got to see things in their life. And so me and another mobilizer, as we were like meeting with them, just started to ask questions of like, hey, have you guys seen this in your marriage? And they're like, no. Like, we've been married for, I can't remember how long they'd been married at that point. And nobody has ever said that about us. And like, it's not because we're awesome. Like, we just listened to what the Spirit was saying to us, and then we just got to live life with Him and just see things and ask questions. And so, like, one of the things that I would continue to like encourage them in is like, hey guys, your marriage will probably be one of the best gospel witnesses you guys have on the field. So like, let's keep fighting for like healthy marriage. And so by God's grace, like now they were approved by their organization and have been on the field for about 2 years now, and are like finishing up language school and like getting ready to dive into full-time ministry. And so like, that's just one want to, like, small, quick example of, like, why we want to do this group for 9 months, living life with you guys, just getting to see your ish and, like, surrendering it to the Lord together. Sorry, I said ish.
Amen. Ish. Speaking of ish, questions? Any questions? Questions about anything? Yeah, go for it. Yeah. 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 So measuring metrics for how we're developing people, so where we would say that they are prepared and ready to go to the field.
Hello. Such a good question. Claps for that question. It's definitely gray. As someone that loves the black and white, I don't have a sheet that I can pass out to you and say. And honestly, every sending agency would also have different parameters. Every sending church is going to have, depending on their history of their pipeline and things like that. But I think just like the expression of some of those things that we've seen people come off the field. So I think there's a consistency in someone's abiding. Like, obviously, we're not going to be feeling it all the time, but I think there's just I think time and a track record of in every season there's like a reliance on the Lord. I think there's health when it comes to like emotional, physical, spiritual, and that will look different. Again, there's different sending agencies will have parameters, but I think like when we think of, it also depends on where you're going. Like health might look different in the no running water place or no electricity versus, you're in Shanghai or Dubai or someplace with, different types of healthcare and things like that. I think, relationally, one of the things that especially people like just being put in kind of like adulting world for that 9 months. Like we just moved from St. Louis and recruited a lot of people that this was their first time living outside of a dorm of their parents' house coming into the 9-month group. So that's just in and of itself a lot. You're paying bills, you have a roommate that maybe you knew before, maybe we helped you guys, pair together for the group. So I would just say like that's the relational maturity part is I think being able to like navigate conflict situations and like, are you one of those people that lean in? Are you one of those that like, please, let's sweep this under the rug? Like, I think just knowing yourself and then like also being able to hold a job, like that's a part of the 9-month group. Everyone still works or has some type of, whatever it's grad school. Almost every profession I feel like we've had go through the 9-month group. So everyone's still working their job. And so I think just also handling a schedule, like being able to say no to things and prioritize, being able to hold a job, but also have this 15 plus hours where you're training for what this next season of life is going to be, where you do quit your job and you do, start transitioning to like full-time language learning and missions work. And yeah, a big part of that is too, like, how are we honoring our parents in that process? I think is another marker for someone, and it's going to look really different depending on your family and maybe your family's upbringing and background, ethnicity, if they're immigrants. Like, there's just so many different conversations, I would say, that navigating that in an honoring and, like, respectful way, but also, like, ultimately being obedient to the Lord. Would y'all add anything? Those are some. There's so many.
Yeah, I think it really is dependent on each person, and yeah, it is really a good question. And I think part of the benefits of doing this for 9 months is that we get to see rhythms and habits of freedom, of health, of those things. And so it's not like I meet with, we want to see rhythms of those things in place, is kind of the way that I always try to describe it, at least.
Yeah, we can chat more if that has if you have more questions. Maybe time for just one more, and then if anybody has more questions, we can chat after. But any other questions? Yes. Potentially. So why don't we can chat offline because it's usually a case by case basis as far as like location and where they're at and what they're looking for and what kind of grad school they're in and what their plan is after. So there's probably just more questions that we would need to engage with in that situation.
I would say too, the 9-month residency is kind of supposed to be the last big life thing happening before you would launch to the field. So if somebody wanted to do grad school, we'd probably say, hey, wait to the last year, or if you're sure you're not doing a postdoc or like a doctoral program, this really is this last launching pad, like on the runway before you're leaving. And so when people are thinking about that, and then most of the time, we're not taking people until they're after graduation. So you would start like the August after your senior year.
And then we passed this out to y'all just so you guys could see it, a rough timeline of what it would look like. And so this is from graduation because we really do want you guys to continue to stay plugged in at CBU. And so like,
Don't drop out.
don't drop out. Just tear up CBU's campus with the gospel, like share the gospel, disciple others, be discipled. But then when you graduate, you would jump into one of these 9-month residencies in the fall of that same year, in August. And then you'd go through that for 9 months. In May is when it would rough timeline that it would finish. And so in that spring of the second half of that 9-month training is where you'd really start to pour out what you've learned over that time into others. So you would help others go out sharing the gospel. You'd help others grow in praying for the lost and for the unreached peoples around the world. And then by that point, in the next year to 2 years, depending on support raising, organization requirements, things like that, you'd be launching to the field. And then that's where we get to what Sean shared earlier of the first 2 years, 3 years is really like adjusting to the field, learning language, and then Lord willing after that you'd start to see again habits and rhythms of like fruitful ministry from that point on. So we just wanted you guys to have this to see it and to start putting your life into this timeline a little bit. But okay, like what would that look like for me to graduate? When am I graduating? What would this look like? And again, we're here for more questions. We're going to go to dinner. So if you guys want to join us or we'll join you, just let us know. We'd love to keep answering questions.
Yep. So here's our contact info if you want it. And my last plug to you, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, just plug in where you are. Plug into Spiritual Life. They're amazing. Morgan and Brian and Jacob are doing a phenomenal job. Belong there. Don't just attend a bunch of stuff. Don't go a mile wide and an inch deep. Like really plug in and belong and grow. If you haven't been overseas yet, get overseas. Go on an ISP. There are incredible experiences. It's different when you get over there and you're able to taste it and see it and smell it and experience it. If you're a junior or a senior, keep plugging in. Belong to Spiritual Life or to your local church. Be discipling. Be growing in leadership and whatever that could look like. Talk with Brian and Morgan and Jacob about those things. And then if you're an upperclassman, junior, senior, we'd love to meet you. We'd love to begin dialogue with you if something like long-term missions is something that you're remotely interested in. And again, I would encourage prayer and fasting, especially that fasting part. If someone tells me, yeah, I prayed about this and God's not calling me to the nation, I'd be like, okay, maybe you prayed. But if someone's like, I fasted and God's not calling me to the nations right now, I'd be like, wow, okay, cool. Yeah, I believe that. That's legit. So I'd really engage on it. And maybe it's not now, maybe it's later. But plug in where you are. Be faithful where you are now. And then we can chat more. Can I pray for us and then we're done? 6:02. I'm so sorry. 2 minutes late. God, you're so good to us. And Jesus, you're so worthy of the worship that you receive, and yet you're worthy of more. Praises due your name. God, there are peoples around the world that haven't heard your name yet that will be around your throne. Jesus, we praise you. We thank you, just as we heard this morning, that your mission is built on a promise, that there will be people from every tribe, language, people, and nation around your throne worshiping you, and we just want to play our part, God. We want to be faithful before you, so would you guide us by your word, by your spirit, through your church and those whom you've placed around us, and would you lead us into faithful obedience to you, Jesus, for the glory of your name. We love you. Pray this in your name. Amen. Thanks, y'all.